Her life was shattered into pieces, and a strange woman took her place, her home, and even her name in her letters. But instead of taking revenge, she decided to write, and every line became the beginning of the end. The book that everyone took for fiction coincided too closely with reality, and when the truth came out, no one could remain unnoticed. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. Snow lay on the rooftops of Manhattan in a smooth, almost theatrical blanket, refracting the streetlights into a soft gold, as if the city wanted to seem kinder than it was. White, diffused light fell through the huge window on the 8th floor of her corner apartment on the Upper East Side, and the room, half empty, with books stacked in boxes and a chair by the fireplace, felt frozen in time. Sarah Reeves sat on the couch, a blanket draped casually over her legs, staring at the dim screen of her laptop, where the cursor blinked at the end of an unfinished sentence. She wasn't typing. She was just watching. The silence was broken by the dull sound of an ice cube falling from the windowsill. Sarah shuddered. "Miss Reeves?" Miriam, her nurse, said from the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" "Only if it is stronger than despair," Sarah replied without turning around. "Then it will be with cinnamon and honey." Miriam smiled softly, already putting the kettle on. The room smelled of dried lavender and paper. Sarah dropped her hands to her knees. They were shaking again. It wasn't pain. She was used to that. It was emptiness. Something between being used to being alone and not being able to believe in movement again. It had been 9 months since the accident. 9 months since her car had spun on the bridge, and when she opened her eyes, Andrew was gone. Just the doctor's voice, the quiet anxiety, and the knowledge that she would never walk again. "How are the letters from readers going?" Miriam asked, coming in with a cup. "There are more than I expected," Sarah said. "Mostly they ask if there will be a sequel to The Silent Mirror. Will it happen? It's hard to write a thriller when your life is now a blanket and silence." "You know that's not all," Miriam said quietly. "And you're more than what's left of that accident." Sarah didn't answer. She took the cup and squeezed it in her hands, as if it contained a heart that she had to learn to hold again. The phone vibrated on the windowsill. "Who is this?" "Unknown number," Miriam said, looking up. "Answer." "I don't want to hear my voice on the phone." Miriam pressed the button. The courier spoke. "For Miss Reeves, an invitation. Urgent, I'm already at the door." A couple of minutes later, she had an envelope in her hands. Beige, thick, with gold embossing on the edge. Sarah tore it up carelessly. The paper rustled louder than it should have. On the snow-white card were written 2 initials, Celeste Moore and Andrew Lawson. They invite you to celebrate the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. On Saturday, at the Lawson family residence in the Hamptons, Sarah slowly lowered the letter. "They invited me," she said, almost in a whisper. "Who?" Miriam came closer. "He and she." Miriam froze. "This sounds like a mockery." "This is mockery. Nothing more." Sarah placed the card in her lap. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there since the accident. The silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. "Are you coming?" Miriam asked. "Of course. I'm the author. I like to observe." The wedding day was sunny, but bitterly cold. A white tent stood in the backyard of the estate, surrounded by glass columns covered in fabric. Everything was perfect. Crystal, a string quartet, smiles. Sarah sat in a chair by the back door, wearing a coat the color of sea steel, her face showing neither surprise nor pain. Celeste walked down the alley in a champagne-colored dress. Her lips were shiny, her hair was shining, she was smiling as if she had never known trouble. She was playing a role, and playing it perfectly. Andrew stood at the altar. Sarah looked at him as if she saw not a man, but an actor who had forgotten that the play had an audience. "Everything all right, Miss Reeves?" whispered the nurse accompanying the guests. "It couldn't be better," she answered calmly. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Sarah slowly rolled between the tables, as if exploring a museum. Celeste approached her first. "Sarah, I'm surprised, but it's nice that you came." "You knew I wouldn't miss the final," Sarah said. Celeste flinched slightly, but quickly recovered. "We just wanted everything to be fair." "Oh, honestly," Sarah repeated. "You're right. It has to be this way. Honestly." They looked at each other, and in that look there was no talk of the past, but of what was yet to begin. "I think you're going to write something great soon," Celeste said. Sarah smiled. "I've already started. The working title is Faces You Don't Notice." She turned and walked away from the table, away from Celeste, away from Andrew. That evening she came home. She took her laptop. She opened an empty file. And she wrote the first line. She entered into other people's lives easily, because she knew what windows that no one locks looked like. March in New York always brought something indefinite, neither warm nor cold, neither rain nor sun. The city was between seasons, and this between was especially true for Sarah. She woke up every day without an alarm clock, drank black coffee from the same mug with a crack at the handle, and opened her laptop, knowing that she would not write a single line again today. Not because she couldn't, but because there was too much inside, and it all seemed useless, until one morning. "Miriam," she said quietly, entering the kitchen, "have you ever felt like someone was acting out your life, like a play? But you didn't write the script. And you're not even the lead." The nurse looked up from her newspaper. "Only in bad dreams, or at school parent-teacher conferences. But you always write the script yourself, don't you?" Sarah sat down, cupping her hands around her cup. I saw the way she looked at me, Celeste, as if not a woman who stole a husband, but an actress who takes a bow and waits for you to start applauding. "And what did you do?" She smiled. "Because the only thing worse is to cry." The nurse carefully put the newspaper aside. "You know, I've seen her before." Sarah froze. "What?" "A month ago, or a little more, I was visiting a friend in the Bronx. Her aunt lived with a girl. She worked for her around the house, helped with finances. She disappeared. And 2 weeks later, the woman had no home or savings." Sarah didn't look away. "And you're sure it was her?" "The name is different. Catherine. But I will never forget the face, the smile. Cold. Kind of like a nurse's when they tell you that your diagnosis is not dangerous, but it still sounds like a death sentence." Sarah stood up slowly. "Do you still have her address?" "I think so. Do you want to—" "I want to understand who she is, and why all this is not about love, but about calculation." She spent the entire day at her laptop, not to write, to search. First, the name Catherine Marlowe, then Catherine M. New York, then housekeeper missing plus hoax, links, forum posts, old mentions in local papers. A couple of hours later, another name popped up, Christina Matthews, same photo, same smile, just a different city, a different man. "This isn't just a story about betrayal," Sarah muttered, looking at the screen. "This is a pattern." The next morning, she went to the library, the old brick one on 65th and Lexington. There, among the dusty microfilms and databases of archival publications, she found another name, Caroline Miller, suspended for financial fraud in 2013. The photo was old, but the eyes were the same. Miriam sat nearby, reading sections of the articles aloud. The victim claims that the woman introduced herself as a volunteer. She paused. And in taking advantage of her trust, gained access to banking information and then disappeared. Sarah closed her laptop. Silence fell over the room. "Do you have any journalist friends?" "One, an old friend from the Post." "Why?" I need someone who can dig deeper than a search engine. 2 days later, John Ellis showed up at their house. Tall, with a beard and a tablet he never let go of. He listened to Sarah without interrupting, flipping through photos, comparing dates, silent. And then he said, I read your books, especially The Second Truth. It's amazing how accurately you sense motives. Do you want revenge? Sarah shook her head. I want the truth to look like it is, without embellishment, without invention, just straight to the point. And you want to use what you can do? I will write a novel, but it will not be a memoir, not a revenge diary. It will be a thriller in which she will recognize herself, and she will not be able to prove anything. Are you sure this will work? I'm a writer, John. If words can't change the world, then why do we talk at all? He smiled. Then I will help. But if you really want this to work, you will have to let others into this story. She has a past, and it seems to be much darker than you think. Sarah opened her laptop. I'll call it The Velvet Trap. Why velvet? Because she doesn't use violence, only gentleness, steps without a sound. And then, you're already trapped. Beautiful, John said, and scary. That's exactly how it should be, because this is not just a novel. This is a warning, and the cursor in the document no longer blinked in vain. It moved, line by line. And Celeste, wherever she was, did not yet know that a new book had already begun with her face. Sarah wrote at night. During the day, the city was too loud, too distracting, too alive to create the silence from which real words could be drawn. But at night, when the streetlights cast a soft glow on the bricks of her building, when everything outside her windows was still, her hands moved smoothly and accurately across the keys, as if a locked compartment had opened inside her that held everything she had been afraid to say. The novel was called The Velvet Trap. There were no direct names. The main character was Laura Dane, a refined, gentle, considerate woman who changed names and cities, who could make tea at just the right temperature so that old people wouldn't burn themselves, and who could say things that sounded like they'd been waiting for their whole lives. Laura was dangerous, not because she screamed. She was dangerous because she listened. Sarah wrote, and every scene was a mirror, sometimes painfully accurate. Before the breath, before the glance over the shoulder, before Laura leans in, takes someone else's hand, and whispers, "Let me take care of you." And the person is already hers. Are you sure it's not too obvious? John asked, turning the page. I'm sure those who know will find out, Sarah replied. And those who don't know, they'll be scared for a different reason. He nodded, taking notes on his tablet. That scene with the old woman and the empty fridge, is that true? It's from the interview you brought me, a woman with dementia. Celeste lived with her for almost half a year. When her relatives arrived, there were no savings or furniture, only a document she signed about the voluntary donation of property. And the police? She refused. They said that if there is a signature, then everything is legally correct. Sarah clasped her fingers together. I don't want her to go to jail. That would be too easy. I want her to see herself in a book, on pages that don't burn. I want her to feel, now, someone is watching. The novel was ready in 9 weeks. The style was sharp as a blade. The language was extremely precise. The publisher did not ask unnecessary questions. The name Sarah Reeves still carried weight. The cover was made in black and white, with a silhouette of a woman walking into the fog. The press service sent out a press release. A new sharp thriller from the acknowledged queen of the genre about a psychological trap that looks like care. First week of sales, top of Amazon. 10 days later, a second edition. 2 weeks later, an article in The Atlantic. Who is Laura Dane, and who does she remind you of? They're starting to get suspicious, John said, linking to a tweet with a quote from the novel. She didn't take by force. She took by choice. There are 1,000 comments under it. Did you see this? Sarah showed the letter that had arrived in her mail. A woman from Seattle recognized the scene. Said she had a volunteer living with her who used the same phrases. She kept recordings of the conversations. We're putting together a dossier. I've almost found a trail in Miami. I think she worked in a hospice doctor's house. Same techniques. Same style. She doesn't just steal, she infiltrates. Is Celeste reading? Of course. Her friend already liked the post with the quote. Sarah sat down in the chair by the window. The snow had started falling again. Soft, silent. It was calm inside. Not from victory, but from the fact that the truth no longer belonged to her alone. A month later, Celeste was the first to contact. The letter was typed on monogrammed paper. The handwriting was even and impeccable. Only a few lines. You have crossed the line between fiction and reality. I hope you are ready to take responsibility for every word. Sarah folded the letter, carefully put it in the drawer, and never opened it again. She's scared, Miriam said, looking at the text. People who are used to control are always scared when someone starts speaking the truth in their language. I'm not afraid of judgment, Sarah replied. I'm afraid of silence. And now it's over. 3 months after the book came out, she was sued. Celeste claimed that the novel depicted her in a manner that clearly violated the bounds of fiction. Sarah received the summons and shrugged her shoulders, as if an old blanket had been thrown off her. Well, she said to John, now it all begins. Do you want her to lose? Sarah looked at the screen, at the cover, at the headlines. No. I want her to understand that now her face is what others are afraid to recognize in themselves. And the streets of New York continued to live. Cars honked, children ran through the underpasses, somewhere in a store quiet music played. But in one window, a woman was writing a new scene, not for revenge, but so that behind every beautiful word someone would hear, I see you. The Manhattan courthouse was neither imposing nor memorable. The gray walls, the glass doors, the dull metal of the security gates, everything spoke of bureaucracy, not truth. But on this day, even the air was thicker. In the courtroom, with its low-gloss wood walls and the theater-high ceiling, there was no theater, no acting, just faces, stares, and a woman whose story began with a broken body and ended on a page read by the entire country. Sarah sat at the defense table. She wore a black suit, tailored and formal. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun. Beside her sat John Ellis and her lawyer, a young woman named Courtney Blake, witty, cool, and incredibly calm. Opposite them sat Celeste Moore and a team of lawyers in impeccable suits. For the first time, Sarah hadn't seen her smile. Her face was still beautiful, but her eyes were intense. They held less indignation than fear wrapped in arrogance. The judge, a woman in her 60s, wearing glasses and with slicked-back gray hair, entered the courtroom, and everything immediately became quiet. The court is now called to hear the case of Moore versus Reeves. The plaintiff accuses the defendant of libel, invasion of privacy, and intentional damage to reputation. The defendant is the author of the fiction novel The Velvet Trap. Ms. Blake, you have the floor. Courtney stood up and walked slowly to the podium, her hands folded on the folder. Your Honor, we are not here to argue about literary taste. We are here to understand. Can a person who committed actions in real life claim protection from truth disguised as fiction? We named no names. We gave no addresses. We created a story. But the story was too similar. Because it was true. Just told in a different language. The judge nodded. Miss Moore, would you like to speak? Celeste stood up, her voice clear and rehearsed. I didn't come here because of the book. I came here because of how it was used. Because people were shouting Laura Dane at me in the streets. Because my business partner broke my contract. Because my husband was starting to have doubts. This is not a novel. It's a weapon. And I'm not going to let myself be used as a symbol of lies. Are you claiming that the book is about you? Absolutely. Every scene is from my life, only twisted and ruthless. Thank you, said the judge. Miss Reeves, is there anything you wish to say? Sarah stood up. The noise in the hall died down. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a writer, she began. And as a writer, I know that the best stories are the ones we're afraid to see ourselves in. I wrote about a woman who disguises herself as caring, as trusting, as compassionate. She doesn't kill. She doesn't steal, literally. She just takes what people give, because they believe. Sarah slowly turned her gaze to Celeste. I didn't name anyone, but people recognized me, because the truth is recognizable. And if you feel that the book is about you, maybe it's not because I described you, it's because you recognized yourself. The judge raised her eyebrows slightly. Does the defense have any more materials? Yes, Your Honor, Courtney said, handing over the folder. There are statements from 4 women from Seattle, Miami, Chicago, and Atlanta. All describe identical incidents. All confirm contact with a woman who changes her name and operates according to the same pattern. The judge looked through the documents carefully. I also received a statement from the book's editor confirming that the novel was written before the plaintiff filed the lawsuit. In addition, I have 2 expert opinions that the novel does not contain any signs of documentary prose. The plaintiff's lawyer stood up. We demand that this evidence be excluded from the case. It was not mentioned in the lawsuit. Dismissed, the judge said calmly. You have made a public accusation. The defendant has the right to defend himself. Celeste bit her lip. She didn't look at Sarah anymore. Only forward. Only into the void. After lunch, Helen Crawford, an elderly woman from Seattle, was invited into the room. She approached the podium slowly but confidently. She held a thin folder in her hands. I want to be heard, she said. Because when I tried to say this before, they called me crazy. We are listening to you, said the judge. She lived with me for 2 months. She helped. She was there. I called her Carol. Then everything disappeared. My pension, my documents. I didn't even know how to get out on the street. But when I read The Velvet Trap, I realized for the first time, it's not my fault. It's hers. And now I'm here because no one should remain silent anymore. Sarah closed her eyes, for a second, to keep from crying. In the evening, the judge made a decision. The court finds that the novel The Velvet Trap is a work of fiction. It does not contain any direct references to the plaintiff's identity. The libel claim is dismissed. The court does not prohibit the plaintiff from taking further legal action, but at this stage, there are no grounds for restrictions. Silence reigned in the hall. Celeste stood up, slowly walked out, didn't turn around. Sarah remained seated. She was in no hurry to leave. Are you okay? John asked. I don't want to be okay anymore, she said. I want to be real, and I think I just wrote my most honest book yet. He nodded. The trial was over, but the story was just beginning. Boston spring smelled of cold air and wet wood. In the morning silence of Cambridge, among the old brick houses and cobblestone paths, Sarah Reeves walked slowly, without hurrying, without hiding from time. In her hands was a thermos of black coffee. On her back was a leather bag with a laptop. In her chest was an emptiness that she was no longer afraid to feel. It was not the emptiness that comes after loss. This was the silence after victory. In it, there was room to breathe. The university building stood modestly, but with dignity. Its ivy-covered facade hummed with new voices as students filed into class, some arguing about narrative theory, others tripping over camera cables. Sarah walked into a large hallway where light flowed from the ceiling through round windows like honey on glass. Her course was called Words as Mirrors. Her students, almost 20 of them, were writing stories that attempted to say things they had been forbidden to say as children. And Sarah read each work as if it contained something encrypted that could save the world. After the lecture, she went out into the park behind the building. She sat on a bench under a tree. The birds sang serenely, as if nothing had ever changed for them. And in that silence, the phone rang. "Do you read reviews?" John Ellis asked on the other end of the line. "No. Why?" "Because there are 5,000 reviews on Amazon. Because critics call The Velvet Trap the most subtle exposé of deception disguised as care. And because the line where the heroine says, 'I didn't destroy it, I opened the windows,' has already become a meme." Sarah laughed briefly and restrainedly. People love symbols. People like it when someone speaks for them, especially if they themselves were afraid. She fell silent. "Have you seen the news? About Celeste?" "Yes. Arrested in Chicago, under the name Amber Tracy. New case, elderly woman with partial memory loss, signature on power of attorney. Celeste disappeared with her finances, but now no one will let her go." Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see. "It doesn't give joy, John, only relief." "Do you understand that this happened because you wrote a book?" "Because I couldn't remain silent any longer." He sighed. "Sarah, do you have a plan for what's next?" "Not yet, but I'm writing." She really did write. The new novel was different. Not about pain, not about exposure, but about how a person learns to live without being afraid to be himself. No one knew the title or even the topic yet, and that was right. A month later, Sarah received an invitation to speak at the Library of Congress. The evening was called Words That Stopped. She was put on last. The audience was mixed. Students, critics, librarians, women with eyes that had more to say than to say. There was a table and a microphone on the stage. She came out, in a black dress, simple as truth itself. And she put only one sheet of paper on the table. "I won't read excerpts from the book. You already know them. I want to read something else." She unfolded the sheet. Her voice was clear but soft. "When you are abandoned, when someone you thought would last forever leaves your life, you can't breathe for a long time. But then one day, you hear your breathing, and you realize that it didn't depend on them. You were always breathing. You just didn't notice." Pause. Silence. "I didn't write the novel for revenge. I wrote it because the truth, hidden in fiction, is safer for those who are not yet ready to say it out loud. But now I want you to know, everything you've experienced is not fiction. It's not your fault, and you don't have to remain silent." The people in the audience didn't applaud right away. They listened until the end, and then they stood up. As Sarah walked out into the hall, a woman wearing glasses and a knitted scarf approached her. "Miss Reeves," she said, "my mother read your book at the hospice. She knew Laura. She was afraid to talk. But after the book, she spoke, and she died peacefully." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I'm glad she could." Later, when the city was already falling asleep, Sarah stood at the window of her new apartment. Modest, but bright. On the wall was a board with notes for a new novel. On the shelf was a copy of The Velvet Trap, with a note from the publisher. "You didn't just write a book, you changed the structure of silence." There was a thin notebook lying on the windowsill. Sarah picked it up, opened it to the first page, and wrote, "Sometimes the only way to get your voice back is to give it to others." And then she closed it, and smiled. Not at the victory, not at the ending, but at the fact that now, everything was just beginning.